Welcome back, my friends. Sean here from Mountains Garage. I'm back on the 71 Nova today. Solving problems one by one, mostly because I'm doing mock-up and final assembly at the same time. There was no mock-up on this. So piece by piece, I'm making all the parts that don't fit together. Following up from the last video of the dry shaft safety loop, I painted it and installed it. It went pretty well. I got a finger's worth of clearance. I played around with the dry shaft piece of tube I got. Hanging down, it should even clear, and when it's at ride height, it should be somewhere in the middle. I hope. On the top side, to mount the safety loop, I used flange bolts and washers. I don't think they'll ever pull through the floor. Next, let's move on to the power steering. I've lit it up with a light. This is the back side of the pump from underneath. In 1968, they stopped using the -6 AN male fitting out of the pump. When I pulled the 307 out and sold it, I laid the power steering pump over on the frame with a bungee cord, and it's been there for 3-4 years now. So I went to physically bolt it on the ZZ383, which has the non-reusable plastic timing cover, and guess what? This inner bracket now needed a horseshoe cut out of the back of it to clear that thick cover. No big deal. So I did that, and I physically got the pump bolted on. Then I've spent a couple days shimming that bracket, the spaces you can put in between, and I've actually got a washer in there trying to get this straight and this way straight. And I'm calling it done. I'm officially satisfied with it. Again, I'm picky, but I don't want the belts flying off. When I had this pump briefly on the 307, I literally ran the engine for 5 minutes. But I had fabbed a bracket that looked like the factory one because I couldn't find one of these. It grabs this hole, the header bolt hole, and then there's a nut welded on the backside that goes here. These aluminum heads, the ports must be in a slightly different spot because that bracket no longer fit. It still fit here and here. So I had this piece of junk under the bench. It was nasty and had some black paint or powder coat on it. I didn't do that great a job cleaning it up. I didn't even clean the galvanized off the nut that's welded on the back for this. And welding it with my new Monster 12 cup on my TIG welder, it welds like you know what you're doing. It was really fun. I'll put a couple pictures attached to that too, because it was just pretty welds for something that I didn't spend any time cleaning like you're supposed to. When I first installed this bracket, I almost took it off to make something else, but it kind of goes with no particular look, kind of universal, industrial, ex-race car, functional, utility, whatever you want to call it, utilitarian. It'll be just fine. Most of the time the hood's going to be shut. Now, my first reaction when the pump wouldn't fit, when I held it up and it hit the timing cover, because I gave this thing a stay of execution the first time on the 307. I should have got rid of it then, because a 1968 power steering Nova or Camaro, I guess 67 and 8 Camaro line might fit, but those are probably the 3 years that the power steering hose currently on the car fits. If I order one for a 1971, you get a 3/8 flare, both ends. Also not super popular. But if you ever needed another one in a hurry, which I guess in this scenario you wouldn't, but I'm always thinking, you know, you're out on the road, you want to fix it, I guess you just drive without power steering. Somewhere in the late 70s and 80s, they went to this, and they're still using this style. In fact, when I put the 5.3 in the LS powered Dodge, that has a Saginaw power steering box, and the factory Dodge hose went right into the back of the LS pump, like it was made for it. So back to my initial reaction when the pump wouldn't clear the timing cover, and I'd already given this thing a stay of execution on the 307. I should have swapped it over to newer stuff then. I have newer pumps and everything, but I keep giving this thing another chance. I thought about just cutting the hoses, letting oil run all over the floor, run across the yard at full speed, and chuck this thing in the woods. But I thought better of it. Oh, and by the way, I put a manual steering box on it. But now that it's in place, it doesn't take up that much space. The hoses, while they look kind of intimidating, aren't bad to work on. I've had them in and out of the car when I was working on the 307. It does have a brand new power steering box. Driving it will be a better experience. Most Novas had either power steering, manual brakes, or manual. This car was deluxe, where it was originally air conditioned, power steering, power brakes. She was fancy, except for the interior and everything else. And the 2-barrel 307 TH350 combo. Not exactly a ripper. So this afternoon's goal is to get the mini Denso alternator to also run the belt straight. Its problem is, it's a metric alternator, so with a 3/8 bolt through the hole, I had a 40 thousandths difference. This hole was 40 thousandths bigger than the bolt. So I went to my bucket of how to repair no such thing as a bolt-on parts bin, raw material, and I cut a bushing. I actually cut it out of, it's like a spring like you'd see in a shock. This probably is out of a shock. So I cut it to length and then bored this to 1/2 inch, and with that spring it drove in pretty tight, and now I got, you know, traditionally a 3/8 bolt through a 3/8 hole, you probably got 6 or 7 thousandths clearance. Hopefully that holds the alternator straight, because my problem before is no matter what you did, when you let go of it, it would cock because that was so big. There was no way to keep it running the belt true, so I'm going to bolt it on now and see if I've improved the situation. All right, that was successful. It now holds it straight. I love the right and left hand rod end adjuster. That's kind of nice. I wouldn't say it's a lot of work. I haven't spent a lot of time adapting this alternator, but it may end up being a colossal waste of time, or I may need the bigger one. Time will tell. At this point, I'm going to say I'm not impressed with it yet. So now I'm going to insulate my fuel line and install that before I install the lower hose. And then I can install the fan, the shroud, and the radiator. I'm just trying to, while I got room and I'm not poking the radiator, I did go ahead and install my fuel feed line to the pump already. Wiring, I've run the positive and negative that I made while I was on the test run stand. I haven't cut them off over here yet, but I have snaked them down through here. I'm going to make a 3-wire harness. It's going to be a positive that would normally hook to the battery cable at the battery. I don't like connections other than, all I want on the battery are the 2 big terminals. So I'm going to run a nice nondescript harness along that and hook it to my power stud on the alternator. I'm going to run a ground for the same reason. I don't want, you know, the factory ground connection at the terminal. That's gone. Don't need that either. That's going to hook to the ground on the block over by the fuel pump. I'm going to run a 3rd wire in case I need it to hook to one of the 2 terminals on the alternator output to eventually shut my generator light off. Again, I swapped another Nova. I was able to make that connection there and then remove the voltage regulator and had the jumper wire here that actually goes to the dash. So this will be gone, which is good. Cleans it up a little more. So I like the wire nice and neat. Before I decided to install some gauges, yeah, that's right, I changed my mind. The engine was only going to have the 12-volt wire to the coil, which when I fired up the 307, when I first got the car, one of the first things I did is I had a points distributor. I took it out. The factory wire from the fuse, the firewall connection to the fuse block, over to the distributor, it says resistance wire all over it. I removed that and I ran an actual, that pink wire is an actual real wire without resistance, so I'm not getting resistance to my 12-volt ignition. Old points, you needed to have a resistor, if you remember that stuff. So I have that 12-volt connection to the coil, my oil pressure switch in the back of the block, this green wire, which is my water temperature idiot light, should go to the cylinder head there, but the fitting was too big. I could find one of these in 3/8. But now I bought electric gauges. I got a 3/8 fitting I'm going to put in this cylinder head and a 1/8 pipe oil sender down by the oil filter. Trying to minimize my connections and the ones I just mentioned over here. So when you go to take the engine out, there's not a lot to disconnect. I received an excellent suggestion after my last video that I should be sure to include part numbers or information on where to buy some of the stuff I'm showing. So in this case, the name of the product is Thermal Zero. If I can find the link to where when I bought it, I will post it at the end of the video, which I'm going to try to start doing. I recently started to at least take pictures of the part numbers, but in this case, there's nothing on the package. But it's not. They make the Velcro kind. This kind is, sewn, so you can slip it over about anything pretty easy. I learned as I went to go a little bit longer, so it covers the fitting and everything. This one's a little bit short, but that's okay. The reason I wanted to do this is that the braid that I use, the braided line, is the way the fittings are. The braid, if you look at it wrong, starts to unfray and it looks terrible. Doesn't affect its function any, but this will hide that. So cosmetically, I think it'll look better. And two, it runs behind the water pump, so it's bound to keep the fuel cooler. Win-win. I said unfray. Is it fray? I'll have to look that up. I always chuckle inside when somebody says, for instance, I'm going to unthaw something. That means you're freezing it. I'll check back to you on that. Feel free to fact check it and tell me. That came out pretty good, I think. Functional. It clears the secondary linkage, no problem. I like it. I clamped up my heater hoses for real. Had to source a hose clamp. They had the same size clamp on both hoses, and that just wasn't going to fly because one clamp was too big. It's all in the details. Speaking of that, it reminded me that it didn't have a fan shroud before, and I need to figure a way to attach all this junk together. The top is going to be easy. The bottom, I believe it had clips. I don't know what I'm going to do there. So before I toss the radiator in, I need to do that. So I had this chrome shroud radiator support, radiator top, whatever you want to call it. It has a weird film on it. So I grabbed some of this and sprayed it on there, and it sent me down memory lane. Now bear with me. The smell of this stuff, it's a nice smell. It reminds me of, I went to Catholic school, K through 6th grade. We had a janitor with at least one finger missing. I think about him every time I run a piece of equipment. And he took his job serious. And that school was spotless. And my powers of observation, the first K through 4, I didn't play sports yet because that was for the older kids. But in 5th and 6th grade, I was on the basketball team, and in the locker room, it smelled exactly like this stuff. So one whiff of that, and I went down memory lane. Incidentally, apparently when I dribbled the ball, I had a really mean look on my face, and the other team, the first team we played, started calling me the mean dribbler, and that stuck for 2 years. Fortunately, until I mentioned it just now, nobody remembers that. What have I done? To attach the shroud to the radiator support, I went digging through my stash of body clips and body hardware, provided by, mostly, my buddy world famous Bob. Old Bob works at the dealership. In fact, the dealership is in the flight path on final approach to the local airport. Occasionally the jumbo jets will line up on the top of Bob's toolbox. It's that big. But on the top of that toolbox is a box he saves for me, and every time he gets a spare nut bolted clip, he throws it in the box, and I come home and patiently pick through it, and days like today, it really comes in handy. That either makes Bob a super nice guy, which he is, or he's an enabler to my hoarding problem. So the top of the shroud, it was easy to slide a clip onto that and use one of the bolts he had. Now the bolts I chose are Torx bit T35. Someday I'm probably going to regret that decision. You can see on this other radiator support that the factory had a hole. It wasn't big enough, but I enlarged that hole and put a clip in there, and there was a matching flat spot on the new shroud. Just had to drill a hole. This wasn't hard at all. With the bottom of the shroud attached and everything else missing, I installed the fan on the engine and then slid the radiator down, put the top on, installed the hoses. Piece of cake. I think the fan stick out is just about perfect to move a lot of air. I need to come up with an overflow, put some liquid in it, and she'll be good to go. Next up, I just need to connect the vacuum power booster, run the throttle cable through the firewall, and while I'm under the dash, install that part of the clutch linkage and finish that. And then this thing's probably going to run, maybe by the end of the week, we'll see. I have a video clip of the 307 idling hooked to this exhaust system, and I'm going to compare it to the 383. Should be interesting. All right, it's late in the afternoon. I'm going to pick up some of my mess, go make dinner. Thanks for watching. We'll probably do it again tomorrow. Take her easy.